Hello, viewers. Today I have a very unique guest. His name is Demetrios Brinkmann. You probably already know him because he has such a vast following. He's a fellow podcaster, an analyst, maybe. I can call him an analyst. I don't even know exactly what he does. To me, he's an international man of mystery. So, to parse that, we got Demetrios. Welcome to this episode.
Wow, I love that intro. The International Man of Mystery. I'll take it. Me and James Bond.
Yes. And the reason I say that is because I find out that he's actually American from Arizona, grew up in Flagstaff,
Hmm.
but lives outside Frankfurt
Yeah,
and travels and does and has a global presence.
that's it.
Oh,
Actually, I'll go a bit deeper on that
yes,
for you
please.
because
Yeah.
I lived in Spain for about 10 years and specifically, not exactly Spain. If you ask the people that I was living around, I was in the Basque Country and my first daughter was born there. And her name is an Indian name. So
Oh,
it's Manjari. So we've
oh,
got like we are the quintessential mutt. A little bit of everything. We'll take it all.
yes. Between Demetrius and I, we have a lot of hair.
For the people that are just listening, they won't understand why. But I
Yes.
yeah.
That is true. Yes. So, okay. So, thank you for that introduction. I can already tell that this is going to be a very interesting podcast because it's unlike most of my other podcasts, which are kind of a bit dry. And this one
Oh,
is literally, this is mind expanding because you talk to a lot of people. So, the reason you are so well known is because you run a community called MLOps.
hmm,
So my question is, why did you start this? How long ago?
yeah.
And what is the scope of this community?
For sure. Let me give you the TLDR version
Okay.
because there's all kinds of turns and tangents we can go on. But started the MLOps community in 2020 when everything was shutting down
Hmm.
and we were all going online. I don't know if you remember getting your inbox flooded with all kinds of deals that were saying, now that everything is online, or we hope that you're staying safe, and here is this whole package that you can use for a product. And I was working for a company that was in the MLOps space. They were specifically in the data lineage space and trying to
Oh,
help data scientists with their data lineage when they were putting ML models into production. And that company said, "Oh, well, maybe we should go online and we should do something."
mhm,
And we did. And our rebuttal to the whole everything moving online was that we said, "All right, well, let's start doing virtual meetups." We started that, and it all fell on my plate. And so I was the one that was organizing the virtual meetups and then trying to keep in touch with people after we had the virtual meetups and they came to the virtual meetups. And then out of nowhere, that company went out of business. And
mm,
so I was looking for a job, and I just remember being so excited that we would get like 10 new people into the Slack workspace that we had in one day. It was like, whoa, there might actually be something here. This is
wow.
pretty wild. And so by the end of May, I was still looking for a job, and I was in Spain at the time, and I
Mhm,
was planning on moving to Germany. And so everything was kind of shaking inside of me because I didn't have a job. I was moving from Spain, which is relatively low cost of living, to Germany, which is a little bit higher, but I had already paid all the down payments and I couldn't really back out of it. And this community was slowly starting to gain traction. And I was sitting there thinking, like, wow, should I try and do more in this
mhm,
community? And I kept doing it. It took to it like a fish in water. And it just started to grow and grow and grow. And I remember by the end of June, this is a number that will probably never escape my mind.
mhm.
We had um, actually, by the middle of June, I was thinking, wow, what if we get 600 people in this Slack? That would be like more people than I would ever imagine could be in there. And then it would be a very strong signal to me that I can probably keep going down this path. And so then, yeah, 600 people showed up a few days later, and I was ready to go for it. So that is the genesis of the story. Now, what we do today, it's grown quite a bit since those 600 people, and we've also
How big?
expanded. It's not just a Slack workspace or just virtual meetups. We do still have those things. The Slack
Mhm.
workspace these days has like over 21,000 people,
Oh,
which is beyond my comprehension completely. And the other things that we do these days, as you mentioned, I'm a bit of an analyst myself. We've done different surveys with the community
mhm.
on how they're using LLMs in production, or we also ran a survey on how they're evaluating their large language models or their Gen AI products. And we've got in-person meetups in over 37 cities. So everyone is empowered to be their own local champion, as we call it. So anyone can start a chapter, a local chapter, and then have local meetups around uh, the MLOps community stuff. And we try and empower people to do that and help them along their journey. We've also got a podcast, we've got a newsletter, we've got a blog that people in the community can contribute to. And I think that's about it. And now, probably like the biggest thing that is on my mind for the past 2 months has been organizing the in-person conference we're doing, and that's the first one of its kind, and it is taking years off my life, man. It is a lot of work.
Oh, wow. And what is the topic and where is it?
For the in-person conference, it's
Yeah.
all around AI quality, and
AI
we want to
quality.
do some really cool stuff with that. We want to
I
make
see.
sure, because AI quality, maybe some people are like, what does AI quality mean even?
Mhm.
It's just basically, does the AI that you're putting out there, whatever shape,
Mhm.
form you're putting out there, it's traditional ML or classical ML, or it's this new Gen AI stuff, or maybe it's robotics and computer vision stuff, does it do what it is intended to do?
Mhm.
And that is the quality metric. And so we have a lot of different ways that we're looking at that. And what we're going to do at like the conference is a kickoff. It's actually really special because the conference is a kickoff to this whole movement that we're creating around these gold standards of what quality AI is. And so for each industry
Mhm.
and each use case within that industry, we're going to create frameworks on what
Yeah.
quality looks like.
Oh, wow. That's really good. So it's actionable. It's not just people coming and talking. So you're talking about frameworks and templates and things that you can repeat and actually put to use, right?
Yeah,
Is that
that's it. That's exactly the idea. And
I
of course,
see?
we are going to have talks.
Yeah, of
We're
course.
going to have our mutual friend Joe. I think he's going to do a
Ah,
DJ set,
yes. Oh,
and
he's going to DJ too, Joe
he's
Reis.
going to DJ.
Oh, wow.
And we're going to have a stand-up comedian. We're going to try and still have the vibe at the conference, but we
Yeah.
also want to make something that people can walk away with. And so it's not going to be like at the conference we figure out these gold standards, because that's a very in-depth and it's a lot to take on. So we're going
So,
to set ourselves a goal of like 9 months to make that happen.
oh, wow. Okay. I remember on one of the podcasts I heard that you too sing and you take requests.
I do. I do. I don't sing well. That's the
Okay.
part that you should probably
So,
preface.
all right. So we won't do it here. But I want to talk to you about MLOps and your conference in a bit. But since we're talking about conferences, I last saw you in March at KubeCon in Paris.
Yep.
What were your key takeaways? What did you like? What's missing or what's hot?
I think at KubeCon, one thing, I was not the best attendee because I just hung out on the vendor floor. And
Hmm,
so I was going around. I'm always interested to see what people are selling, who's
hmm,
having success, and what their messaging is, because
hmm,
from this marketing background and the sales
hmm,
background, I like to see how people are positioning themselves. And obviously, you saw a lot of people talking about how they were using AI in their products. But one thing has become very clear. It felt like there was almost like a third, there was three different categories, I guess, three different buckets that I would say the vendors fell into.
hmm,
One was how to optimize costs. So something around cost and saving costs with Kubernetes. The other was all around security. There was a lot of security companies and how to stay safe and how to make sure that you don't get hacked. And then the other third was just the rest. I would say like miscellaneous. I think
Yeah.
some cool ones were like the chaos engineering and uh, a lot of pipelining stuff. Like Argo is huge. Argo has absolutely blown up. That is very clear.
Mhm.
There's a movement happening right now with Argo and all that, all the
And
workflows that you've got.
so for people who don't know Argo, what does it do?
So I would consider, I'm not the expert on Argo, but I would consider Argo. So there's two different types of Argo. Uh, and I can't remember the other type. I know there's Argo workflows, and then there's Argo some other
A continuous
name.
continuous deployment space?
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of pipelining. I know that Kubeflow, which is a machine learning or MLOps tool, is built
Mhm.
on top of Argo, and a lot
Mhm.
of people that are using Kubeflow, they get sick of using Kubeflow and then they just go directly to Argo. And so you can see that it's having its moment. It is getting
Yeah.
a lot of attention. A lot of developers are going on to that.
Talking about Argo, last year at KubeCon North America, I ran into the Intuit team,
Uh-huh.
and I'm mostly in the data and analytics space. So data products is something that's near and dear to my heart. I was actually shocked to hear how deep Intuit is into data products, but the entire orchestration
Mm.
of data products is done through Argo, which I came out of Intuit, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah.
Uh, I
So they don't
100% believe
use
it. I think there's
all
some
open
big
source.
names.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of big names that are using Argo, and it's
Yeah.
becoming a standard, it feels like.
Yeah. Going back to your community, the name ML Ops somehow does not resonate with the current sentiment, which is mostly about LLMs and Gen AI.
Uh,
What are your thoughts about the name of the community and how's that reflected?
yeah, you sound like the VCs that are like,
I talked
they're
to
not ready
Disney.
to invest in MLOps tools
Yeah,
because MLOps is not hot anymore. So it
yeah.
definitely is not as hot as it was in 2020. That's for sure. I'm not super worried because I feel like we've got enough of a brand.
Mhm.
And we also, if you look at what the AI infrastructure landscape is right now, it is still MLOps.
Mhm.
And so, one thing that's happened that I think is fascinating is that you've had this opening of the aperture of who can leverage AI
Mhm.
when ChatGPT and all these APIs, like just basically model APIs, came out. And so now you've got so many people that are coming into the space and being able to create something that's pretty cool with it. But eventually, if you want something that's going to work and it's going to work reliably, you're going to have to go down a little bit deeper. You're going to have to figure out data pipelines. You're going to have to figure out the ML ops of it all. So I still think it's there. It's
Yeah.
just, it needs to be found almost. And there's a lot of noise that's happening in the AI space, as you mentioned, and there's a lot of things that are coming out and a lot of tools that are coming out. And I'm not too worried that people aren't like all about the term MLOps anymore. And maybe
Mhm.
it is a passe term. It's like, oh, that was so 2020. But I still think that it is, for me, something that I can't change the name now. Like the rebrand is not. I've messed around. I played and
And
toyed with the idea of changing the name, and people
yeah,
in the MLOps community even went and bought the domain LLMOps
ah,
community.
I see.
And if you go to that website, it just redirects back to our website because at the end of the day, LLM ops, ML ops, it's kind of the same thing. There's
Actually,
there's
yeah.
differences, but
So you're right, Demetrius, because we tend to fixate on all these cool things. Like right now, it's about AI agents. So having this
mm,
agentic architecture, but that's at the highest application level. None of that can even perform unless you have a solid foundation,
yeah,
which comes from operations and quality and some of the
yeah.
topics that you're addressing, and of course, making sure your data is secure, available, and high quality. So all of that needs to be in place before you can go and experiment. So one of the topics that we used to hear quite a bit about in this MLOps was feature stores. Are feature
Mhm.
stores still hot as a category, or what's happening to that space? Is that a space you look at?
Yeah, one thing that is fascinating when it comes to feature stores is I think just like a week or two ago, Airbnb open sourced their feature store.
Oh,
I
okay.
can't remember what they called it, but it was it's like now they're doing this, they had so much time to do this, but it came from their internal tool Zipline, which was very popular and everybody had heard a lot about, but they never open sourced it. It was just the internal tool that they talked about sometimes.
I see.
And so there still is movement around that space. What you don't see, like, I know that LinkedIn open sourced their feature store, Feather, a few years ago, and it feels like everyone who was working on that at LinkedIn has moved on. And then Feast is another open source
Mm.
feature store, and
Uber, right? Uber open sourced it years ago.
Gojek. Gojek
Okay.
open
Oh,
sourced it.
okay. I
Yeah,
see.
yeah. And that, I think Red Hat has kind of taken stewardship of it.
I see.
And so you don't necessarily see it as much these days. But one thing that I think is fascinating is how much attention is in the Gen AI space. But if you go to the actual stuff that's probably making the companies a lot of money or saving companies a lot of money,
Mm.
it's probably this really like traditional ML stuff, whether it's fraud detection, loan scoring, or like recommender systems. These
Right.
models are they're much more mature, or the space is much more
Mm.
mature, and the use cases are much more mature, and you see a
Mhm.
lot more of that. And for each one of those use cases that I just said, feature stores are pretty relevant.
I see. So it's interesting. I didn't know the Red Hat has taken stewardship of Feast, and IBM Red Hat just announced they're buying HashiCorp.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see because Red Hat is going to become the steward of that piece as well, Terraform. So Terraform Feast, feature store. So it'd be interesting to see how IBM innovates in this space and still hopefully keeps it all open source.
Yeah. Wow,
So
Terraform, man.
yeah,
That
let go ahead, please.
I was just gonna, I was gonna say like they kind of messed up on that one. People were
On
not happy
Terraform,
with.
yes,
Yeah,
yes. So let's talk about open source.
yeah,
What is going on in the open source licensing? What are your thoughts? What are you hearing?
yeah. When it comes to open source in this space,
Mhm,
obviously, like open source models are one thing,
mhm,
or quote unquote open source models, because there's so many different ways that people call their models open sourced, but then they don't reveal everything that you would expect, and it's not as transparent as you would expect, so you can't go and recreate it. But in the infrastructure space, I think open source is definitely pumping. And there's a lot of companies out there that are doing things with open source, and it's helping move the how can I say this? It's helping give the railroad, or it's laying the tracks for the train to come.
mhm. So in the AI space, uh, Llama 3 claims to be open source, but it's only open source of weights. But Snowflake just came out with Arctic a week ago, and they say it's Apache license, which is the first time I've seen the word Apache associated with an LLM. Before
Mm.
that, Databricks came out with DBRX. Uh, are these, what's the trend here?
Yeah, it does feel like people want to just open source everything now because the community is ready for it,
Hmm.
and also these gigantic companies know that's not how they're going to make money. Like a Snowflake and a Databricks, they're not going to try and make money off of an API of a
Correct.
model.
Correct. Yeah. So, so Demetrius, on this podcast, I want to make a startling uh, rumor
Uh-oh.
that I think GPT-5 or 6 will be open source,
Oh,
free.
wow.
But this is my guess. I
Oh,
think
wow.
with Llama 3, and once Llama 3 comes out with its 408 or 480
Mhm.
billion parameter model this year in June, from what they've said, I think GPT-5 will be under a lot of pressure. That's my OpenAI
That
will
would
be
be
under pressure.
incredible.
So,
It would be incredible if it was. I still think there are a lot of pieces that you need. Just because you have this gigantic open source model doesn't mean that
mhm.
everything is super easy for you now. It's still
Yeah,
a big model and you need all the infrastructure. You still need a lot of piping to be able to make use of that big model.
yeah. I've heard you say on your podcast, you are not very gung-ho about training models.
Mm.
Can you talk about like if you were to rank training versus fine-tuning versus RAG versus just simple prompt with few shots learning,
Yeah.
how would you, what's a landscape?
Yeah, I think start simple. And then if you
Hmm.
can't get the results you're looking for, or you can't move the needle on the metrics you need to move it on,
Hmm.
then go to the like more complicated step. And it almost feels like just start very simple. If you can, obviously use something off the shelf API. A lot of companies can't just use off the shelf API, so they have to think that through a little more. But there are quite a few companies that can, or
Hmm.
if you're starting your own company and you're a builder, then you make the choice and go with tuning those prompts and figure out if you can get there with prompts. If you can't get there with prompts, then maybe you've got to go and do something else, and you've got to figure out, all right, uh, do I need to, and like, should I have a RAG architecture,
Yeah.
or is that even overcomplicating it? Because sometimes that's even not necessary. Most of the time it is, especially if you want to reference stuff, but maybe
Hmm.
it's not. So you can go that next step. And there's two kinds of RAG architectures, I think, that are becoming more and more prevalent these days. One is called like naive RAG, and the other one I can't remember the name of, but we'll just, for the sake of argument, call it like complex RAG.
Hmm.
And so these different RAG architectures, you can start with one that's simple, and then does it help? Do you need to keep going deeper down the rabbit hole there? And if you're
Hmm.
still not getting there, then figure out fine tuning and figure out how to like make it work in that regard. But I would basically say, like, whoever thinks that they need to train their own model, especially if it's a foundational model. If it's not a foundational model and you're going with other models for other use cases, then that's a whole different story, right? Like if we're going back to the recommender systems or the fraud detection,
Hmm.
that is a different story altogether. But if it is for large language models, foundational model types, and you think you need to train your own model, you need to really have clear how much data you're going to need. And one thing that Mate, the one of the founders of Databricks, said to me when he was on our podcast is like,
Hmm.
you can spend millions of dollars training a model and wait like 40 days, and then the model can come out and it can be absolutely shit.
Yeah.
And so what are you going to do then, like how are you going to prove the ROI there? It's
Correct.
very, very difficult to do. And so I am in the camp,
Yeah.
like, leave that stuff to the professionals.
Yeah. Yeah. I so even when it comes to models, let's take it a level down because there's foundational models or large language models with hundreds of billions of parameters, but then there are what people are calling small language models, which are
Uh-huh.
very domain specific. Your company like Pfizer or some pharma company, you've got a ton of, in fact, even Google has Palm 2 and MedPalm 2. So
Yeah.
uh, So are you seeing the small domain specific models taking off anytime soon?
I'm hearing people talk about them a lot, but I haven't actually seen them a
Mhm.
lot. So it's one of those things that it reminds me of last year. I feel like at this time, a lot of people were talking about fine tuning and, oh, we're going to fine tune this, we're going to fine tune that, without really recognizing what fine
Yeah,
tuning would give you. And when it comes to like the small language models, it's almost more in vogue to talk about them than it is to actually use them, because it's really hard to make a small language model work at
yeah,
the same level as a large language model. Even a 7B is pretty shit most of the time. And that's 7 billion. Like, go and try and do that with a 1 billion? Yeah, right.
yeah. You
Good
know,
luck.
Microsoft came out,
With fee, right? Yeah.
yeah, 3 billion, and they created a term called compact
Hmm.
language model. I think small models are going to become prevalent, not just because of domains. Whether we get there this year or not, we don't know. But companies like Apple, when Apple comes out with
Yeah.
its new iPhones later this year, in September is when they generally launch the new ones. I think it'll be iPhone 16. It'll probably have a GPU and it'll have a small compact model running on it.
Yeah. Hopefully Siri will work now. That's all I ask for.
Actually,
Please.
I'm even afraid to use that word because my iPhone is sitting next to me and it'll say, uh-huh, yes, how can I help
Exactly. It's
you?
so bad.
And it just, yeah, wakes up in the middle of
But I've
conversation.
heard that a lot. I've heard a lot of people talk about how, oh, yeah, now we're going to get AI on our phones and it's going to be with these small models. And
Mhm,
I'm still a little skeptical. I hope. So don't get me wrong. I am very hopeful because I would love
mhm,
for it to actually work. But I'm a little bit skeptical because I think a lot of people are of the idea that we're at the bottom of the J curve. And I wonder if we're at the top and it's about to like start sloping off for at least another X amount of time before there's another gigantic breakthrough. So
mhm.
I don't know. I try and keep that in mind. I hope I'm wrong, but I try and keep that in mind, that all of this attention and excitement and like people thinking, oh, well, we're like 90% of the way there. That last 10% can take some time.
Yeah. So this week, in fact, I'm in New York right now. Right outside my window is Hudson Yards, and I was at MongoDB.local NYC, which is their biggest event of the year. They announced uh, the biggest announcement was something called MAAP, which is MongoDB AI Applications Program. So it's an
Mhm.
ecosystem play. It's got the model developers, the hyperscalers, uh, LangChain, Llama Index, or the tooling companies and professional services. And they were asking, so what do you think of our AI stack? And I'm thinking, wait, the last conference I was at was Google Cloud Next. They have an AI stack. AWS has an AI stack.
Everybody
Microsoft
wants it.
with
Yeah.
OpenAI. What's going on in this space? Is like, how many stacks do we have? Just your thoughts on what do you think?
Yeah, it is people trying to grab market share, or they're trying to find their wedge, right? And
Hmm.
figure out how can we get involved here. It is fascinating to think about that, because especially when it comes to OpenAI, how they're on one hand saying, come and build on us, come create GPTs. And on the other hand, you've got Sam Altman going on to different media outlets and saying, we're going to bulldoze you if you're just creating a wrapper. So it's like,
Hmm.
okay, well, I guess I'm not going to go and create anything on them. Let's figure out how I can do something on a different stack. But it reminds me a little bit of back in the day with the phones, right?
Mhm.
You would be like, oh, well, I'm going to go and build this on iOS, or I'm going to build this for Android. But in that case, there was only two. So you could kind of switch between them, or you could go and
Mhm.
try and find success on one first and then go to the next. Here, if there's like 10 or 15 different ecosystems,
Mhm.
what's going to get the critical mass, and where's the attention going to go? I'm not sure.
So talking about, all these things that are coming up, yet another highly celebrated stuff from the investors is Devon from
Oh
Cognition
yeah.
AI.
Oh, what a incredible story Devon is, huh? Where are you gonna go with this question?
No, I'm just curious. Well, what are your? I have my views, but I just want to know what do you think of Devon, and what are you hearing?
Oh man. I just know that Devon was the perfect play as far as marketing. And
Uh,
much like with it's just I don't want to knock them because I appreciate people trying to push the limits. And I appreciate people trying to get us thinking in different ways.
hmm,
Where I think it was a little bit that I didn't like was when the media took hold of it and then like started pumping up the narrative that why even learn to code now? You've got this software coder that's basically like 10x any developer that you know, or they're a junior dev right at your fingertips. And
hmm,
then when people started using it, they started realizing that it was not what was promised,
hmm,
and it is not actually even usable. And so I think a lot of people felt very betrayed, and that is dangerous
yeah,
because then it's going to be a lot harder for us to believe anything when it comes out. And like the little boy who cried wolf, what happens when there actually is something that is useful?
right.
So I tend to not gravitate towards
Hmm,
what is in the headlines. And I try and find the stuff that in the community people are talking about, like, this is actually valuable to me. And
hmm,
this is whatever, saving me time, or this is how I'm thinking
hmm,
about XYZ. And so when it comes to Devon, they got a lot of attention. Same with the humane and the rabbit. And those are
hmm.
cool things. It's great to think about like what our life could be like. But again, it doesn't look like it's working as expected, or it's not up to par with what the
Hmm.
consumer needs.
So my thoughts are completely aligned with yours, and I love your honesty in how you feel about it. What I'm seeing is that a lot of AI companies today are just like you said, they're wrappers on top of OpenAI. All they're doing is just calling OpenAI chat completion API. But the way the chat completion API works is you give it some prompt, it guesses what's the probability, highest probability of the next word. Sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it hallucinates, but that's
Mm-hmm.
it. So I think what Devin's idea is correct because they want to be able to act like an AI software engineer, be able to reason, plan what you want to do, and then go execute it, write the code, then create the test code. So like you applaud them for thinking through expanding the way we think about it. But again, going back to what you said and why I was reminded of this question is because big companies will easily bulldoze these small companies, and we already see that. For example, Microsoft owns GitHub. GitHub has all the
Yeah,
code. How difficult is it for GitHub Copilot or workspaces to provide this feature set, right?
exactly. Yeah, and you saw GitHub just release something this week.
Yep, workspaces, which
Yep.
does what it does. And I've been telling people for a long time that you don't want to take your data into an AI stack because now you're making a copy of your data. It'll soon go out of sync. You'll have overhead, security, performance, latency, all of that. You bring AI to where your data is. Same thing with things like Devon. You want to bring your planning, execution to where the code is, which is in GitHub,
Hmm.
instead of taking it outside to a different product.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, just the thing that was the hardest was that, and this is happening like once a month, I would say, you
Mhm.
have these announcements where you get promised the moon and back, and then everywhere, even people and podcasts I listen to that have nothing to do with AI are like, wow, this is changing the world. And look at this. Did you see this demo from these guys, Devon? We'll take Devon for this particular instance.
Mm.
And when I'm hearing all this, there's a part inside of me that's just like, I don't know, really? Like, am I the crazy one here for not trusting it at face value right away? Am
Yeah,
I just very cynical on this? I want to be hopeful,
yeah.
but a part of it doesn't really sit well. And
Hmm.
so I was laughing with a friend of mine the other day because it feels like we're a bit in the field of dreams era of AI. And it's really like all of the people that are building with AI, it feels like their mantra is if you build it, they will come.
Hmm. I was just
When
gonna say.
really you're not having the product mentality of like, what's the
Yeah.
problem I can solve? I know there are some incredible companies out there that are solving
Mhm.
some true problems and pain points.
Mhm.
So don't get me wrong. I understand that there are incredible companies, but the stuff that is getting very popular or the narratives and the different themes that people are pushing is like, well, what can we do if, let's take for example, we've got this 1 billion sized model on our iPhone that has the GPU in the next iteration. What are we going to be able to do now that we with this 1 billion model? And what it's almost like, all right, we're just setting the foundation so that people can
Yeah.
build on top of it. And I understand that because that is kind of how it's happened in the past. Like you now have this phone and then you build stuff on it and the ecosystem evolves and it comes up. But it is a little bit of the, all right, let's just see if we build this, are people going to gravitate towards it? Are people going to use it? That's kind of how I've been feeling, which is great. It's the exploration mode.
Yeah.
I just try and not take everything at face value. And especially when it comes to agents, man, I just know from a lot of people working with agents, they're
Mhm.
so finicky and they're so difficult and they're so unreliable that whenever I see anything with agents, I'm a little bit like, I don't know if we need a whole new model architecture breakthrough before agents actually can become
Mhm.
a viable option.
So Dimitri is talking about these new developments. Have you had on your podcast companies that are native pure vector databases? Have those people come to your podcast?
Yeah, they're everywhere. They
Like
popped
this?
up like mushrooms, didn't they?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
so many different vector databases out there.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think of vector databases?
I love the idea. I think there's some really cool vector databases, and whether or not they need to be a standalone thing or you can get your vector database. I know there's a whole cult of people that just love PG vector. And for
Mhm.
the most part, like if you're doing simple stuff and you don't have that much scale, it's probably good enough if especially if you're used to it. If you're
Mhm.
used to working with Postgres, you probably don't need much more than PG vector. But when you're trying to use some heavy duty stuff, then you might want to look into what other options there are on the market. And so each of these vector databases kind of positions themselves in a different way.
Mhm.
And I think that's fascinating to look at. Okay, if I have this use case and these are my constraints, which vector databases should I be considering? Or if I'm looking to do these things inside the vector database, what
Mhm.
kind of features can I be expecting from each one?
Which companies are you most excited about in this space? Just either native vector databases or traditional databases with vector embeddings being stored in them.
Mm. So I really like what Lance DB is doing.
Hmm.
They've created a whole new file type too,
Oh, really?
and they I think they've seen a lot, but it again it depends on what your use case is, right?
Yeah.
So are you are you doing traditional ML and you have a recommender system and you need that for the vector database? Like that's what you need the vector database for? Or is it a RAG and you want to do everything inside of the
Mm.
vector database, then you might want to look at one of these. Or is it just you want a vector database that's really fast and is going to be able to support you at gigantic scale? And then do you want it open source or do you want it closed sourced, and that kind of stuff? So one thing that I have noticed, which I
Mm.
think is wild, is how many companies that were databases just said, "Oh yeah, we also have vector databases now
Yeah,
too."
everybody.
Everybody. I don't think there's a database out there that
Yeah,
doesn't support vectors now.
yeah, that is correct. Yep. Because a vector is literally an array. It's a
Yeah.
two-dimensional array. It's so simple. You've got like floating point numbers, basically,
Mhm.
is what it is. How hard it is to have that. I think
Yeah.
what is harder is to have the ecosystem. By ecosystem, I mean that before you can even create an embedding of a word, you've got on your source, let's say a PDF. How are you going to chunk it, right? So intelligently divide it up, or a code, how are you going to chunk that code so you can then embed it? I think that's the trickier part than storing the vector embeddings.
Yeah, actually one thing that a lot of people have been saying is hard when it comes to basically like up until now we've just been dumping everything into the vector database, right? And what happens when you have an HR chatbot that has all of your HR policy in the vector database, and it's been converted into embeddings, and then you throw it into the vector database, and now you are updating your HR policy.
Hmm.
And so let's just take vacation policy for one. And so you have no longer have 30 days of vacation, you have 20 days of vacation. And me as an employee, I go and ask my HR chatbot, "Hey, how many days of vacation do we have? What's our policy on that?" And the chatbot says you have 30 days because it doesn't know what to pull from when it comes to the policy. And so that's a really tricky scenario. How do you go and how do you update every single place that says the policy? Because maybe you just update the it would be so nice if there was just a HR policy master doc that you could go and you can say,
Yeah,
"Here, let's just diff that." But that usually doesn't exist. And there's many different places that have the policy written in it. And so, how do you make sure that all of those get updated as information gets updated? And that's cool if it's just a policy. But imagine information is continuously being updated
yeah,
on a daily basis.
yeah, very true. Yeah, I think this is where RAG comes in, or maybe, where
Yeah. But even then, if you think about RAG, the how does the retrieval part, that's where you have to evaluate what you are retrieving, because
Mhm.
how do you know what you've retrieved is the most up to date, or it is the best source
Mhm.
for what the question is asking? Because it potentially it is actually answering the question, but it's an outdated source, and so you're not getting most up to date
Correct,
information.
correct. Yeah. I think a big trend is how do you personalize your AI workload on your data, like ground it, that I think is a very big thing. So,
Mhm.
so going back to the ML companies that you've been involved with, what is the current generation? There was, Gen 1 companies that came out first, then like how do you categorize the space of machine learning companies these days?
Yeah, I think that's fascinating to look at. Like the Gen 1 companies, you could consider like the Domino Data Labs and the even maybe Databricks, but it's kind of in a league of its own with Spark and all that stuff. But Data Robot and what are some other ones that were in of that same
Like data
vintage?
IQ,
Data IQ, yeah, and they've seen impressive growth, and they,
as yeah,
yeah, SAS even too.
yeah.
And so that was, I don't know, when did they come out? Like 2015, maybe even way earlier. And ML is part of their story, but I don't know how much of their story. They kind of had to become more platform plays and also support the analytics or support what like Data Robot with the auto ML, and that story was very hot for a while. But then you had in like 2020, 2019, the explosion of the pointed solutions in the MLOps ecosystem. And that's when things came out, like a lot of monitoring tools. Like what's happening with vector databases right now, I think happened in the MLOps space with monitoring tools in 2020. You had a lot
Hmm.
of different monitoring tools that were kind of hard to differentiate between one or the other and what they could do. And so that happened in 2020. And now, since the LLMOps craze, or I don't think many people are actually calling it LLMOps anymore,
Oh,
actually.
right. Already.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that term has fallen out of
Wow.
favor
That's
too.
fast.
Yeah, I think it's just like the infrastructure layer, the AI infrastructure layer is the new area. And tools that have come out now, I think, are the vector databases. You have like prompting solutions that are looking after like prompt tracking.
Hmm.
And that kind of falls in line with back in the ML days, you had the experiment tracking. So a lot of those companies have pivoted or started helping
Hmm.
that prompt tracking. But then you have specific only prompting things, which
Hmm.
is another interesting one because I don't know if prompting is going to stay around forever. I hope it doesn't, but
I
that's a whole
hope it
nother
does not.
conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like how do I know what's a good prompt? It's such
yeah,
a hit and trial, hit or miss.
it is. It is black magic for sure. But then, like, I think there's two areas that I've seen so many companies doing the same
Hmm.
thing or very undifferentiated. One is evaluation tooling.
Hmm.
I feel like there's a ton of tools out there that are doing stuff with evaluation. And
Hmm.
then on the other side, but it's great. It's great to see because you need evaluation and it's a very, very hard problem. I wonder how far you can get with a tool as opposed to just putting in the work. It feels like evaluation just needs like, it's very expensive. It's an expensive endeavor because you need humans to be doing the evaluating for a lot of the time. And so tools hopefully can help. And people are trying to crack that nut with the
Yeah.
tooling, but there's a lot of tools out there that are trying to do it. And so that's an interesting one. And then on the other side, you see continuous training or like continuous fine tuning as another area that there's a lot of tools that are kind of saying the same thing. And they'll usually use what we were just talking about earlier. They'll usually use language like small language models, right?
Mhm.
Because you need continuous fine tuning if you have a small language model.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And so you talk about Gen 1, data robots and SaaS. Is there a new Gen 2 or Gen 3, or where are we right now?
I think we're in Gen 3. So I would say like Gen 1 was SaaS, then you had Gen 2 was like the MLOps companies like the monitoring frameworks, data drift, all those feature stores, experiment tracking. Those were the
Gen
even
2.
some pipelining tools like the Kubeflows and the Pachyderms of the world. And
So who
then
is Gen
and
3?
yeah, like DVC is another classic one. You have the Clear ML is one. I can think of a ton of those like Gen 2 that were very hot. They got funding. They probably got a lot of funding in like 2020, 2021.
Mhm.
And then now we're in Gen 3 where it's a lot of the evaluation specific problems or the continuous fine tuning problems or prompt tracking, anything to do with
Okay.
prompts.
Very nice. Okay, so moving on. uh, we saw this explosion of Gen AI stuff when the transformer architecture came out in 2017. Are you hearing that there is new ways of doing future state language foundation models? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the Mamba architecture is popular or is getting a lot of attention. I think that's probably the one that I've seen. Uh, just going back real fast, if I could, to that last question too. One gigantic piece that we completely neglected to talk about were the all-in-one solutions that you get
Hmm.
from the cloud, which I think a lot of people are using, probably like the majority are using. And that's why this whole sector is fascinating to me, because you've got the sage makers that are
Hmm.
doing 99% of what you need done, or the vertexes out there, and they're, or Azure ML. All of those pieces are the managed
Yeah.
MLOps or LLM infrastructure layer for you. And we've had a lot of people come on to
Hmm.
the MLOps community and say, hey, the best part about Vertex is that it is 100% fully managed. The worst part about Vertex is that it is 100% fully managed. You know, like, it's my love and hate relationship.
Yeah. So it's Vertex with Gemini, their models. It's on AWS, it's SageMaker with Bedrock, and
Well, Bedrock, I think Bedrock is a little bit different, because you know how SageMaker or Amazon has to make everything just a little bit more confusing. Bedrock is like where all the Gen AI stuff happens. I think
yeah.
SageMaker is where all like the infrastructure stuff happens. I'm not actually super clear with
Yeah.
how it works, to be
And then
honest.
within Bedrock, they are Titan. The models are called Titan.
Yeah.
So
That's one of the Amazon models. And then they have all the other models that you can
yes,
serve
you
too.
can,
Right.
they've invested, we know, 4 billion in Anthropic, Cohere.
Yeah.
You can call Mistral open source. You can call
Yeah.
all of them from Bedrock. So, which is the other interesting thing that's happening because I would guess from Bedrock, you cannot call Gemini. So you go, if you want to use Gemini, then you're in the Google AI stack. Now you can use all the Gemini, Mistral, Anthropic because they also invested in Anthropic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
crossing. So we are almost out of time. We just have a few minutes left. I just want to ask you, how do you keep up with all these new developments in our space?
I'm not sure I keep up that well. I just follow what's happening in Slack. I get to talk to a lot of great people in the community and have the podcast. We have like 3 episodes a week. So I get to see what's happening there. And also, I am a host for a podcast with Deepgram. And Deepgram is a text to speech, speech to text API. And so that's more of the application layer. So I get to stay up to date with everything that's happening there. So I kind of go, I don't go all the way down the stack. I would say DevOps is where I probably get out of my depth. So at KubeCon, that's why I was really enjoying learning about what's going on in the DevOps space and how that relates to what's happening a little bit higher up the stack. But yeah, I would say that, and trying to just speak with as many amazing people as possible, read as many of the cool papers that come out that I see online, and
What's one piece of advice you would give to the listeners, how to navigate this noisy space we are
oof. I I feel like you have to have your trusted voices that are gonna be able to steer you clear of the hype and the
in?
noise.
Mhm.
And you can still be aware of the noise, or at least I'll say for me, what I've done is I have people that I trust, and that's usually a lot of people in the community, and I listen to their words and their takes on things before I listen to what the hottest stuff is. But I still subscribe to a ton of newsletters that are not our own. I still watch a lot of videos, or I scroll on social media and I see what is coming out. So I'm fairly in tune, but then I get almost like the real deal by staying in tune with what people are talking about in the community.
That's great. Yeah, so basically listen to a lot of people, read a lot, do your research, get more aware of what's going on before you form an opinion, and then be ready to change it
Yeah.
because within a couple of days something new will come up and then now you have to relearn what's going on.
Well, yeah, and have your trusted sources. Have those
Yes.
people that you weight a little bit
Yeah.
higher than others.
Yes. Demetrius, thank you so much for taking the time. It was such a blast. Really enjoyed talking to you. And all the best for your June event. It's in
25th.
June 25th in San Francisco.
Yes, thank you.
How
San
do
Francisco is
people
awesome.
find out about it?
They can go to aiqualityconference.com, or just if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'll probably be talking about it eventually
Got
between
it.
my other jokes that I make on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to staying in touch.
Right on. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. Hope this was a lot of great information. I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye bye.